The Lord watches over the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. That's the last verse there in Psalm 1. And David certainly has experienced the truth of that in his life. Last week we talked about how David repented from his sin with Bathsheba. But God said that even though you've repented from your sins, I will forgive you, but there's going to be some lasting consequences for your actions. And God spoke through the prophet Nathan and said, 1, the sword will never depart from your house. 2, out of your own household I am going to bring calamity on you. 3, I will take your wives and give them to one who is close to you. He will lie with your wives in broad daylight. And 4, the child born to Bathsheba will die. Now, we're going to fast forward. This is a couple years later after all of that happened. But first, parents, I want to ask you a question. Have your children ever done something so bad that you didn't even know how to punish them? You weren't even sure what to do as a parent. It was so bad, you just weren't sure what to do about it. I hear some people, or maybe, are you trying to say you're the one that did something so bad your parents didn't know what to do? Yeah. I won't ask you to raise your hand and tell us. That'll be for the silent prayer time, right? That'll be for confession. Well, David is about to find himself in that situation. By the way, a couple had a boy that was difficult to raise, and he was in all kinds of trouble. He'd be in trouble at home, and trouble at school, and trouble out in the community. One year, his parents, they went on a trip without him, and they left him home with some relatives, and they went to Europe. And as they traveled around Europe and they went to different countries, they would send home a postcard and say, here's what we did in Germany, and here's what we were doing in Italy. And at the end of each postcard at the bottom, it would say, wish you were here. Well, they went to Germany and Italy and France, and they visited several countries. And when they were in Greece, they sent back a postcard that said this: today on our tour, we came to a cliff over which the Greek women were said to have once thrown their defective children. Wish you were here. 2 Samuel chapter 13 tells us that in the course of time, Amnon, son of David, fell in love with Tamar, the beautiful sister of Absalom, son of David. So Amnon is the oldest son. Absalom is another son of David's, 2 different moms. Tamar was Absalom's sister. So Amnon and Tamar, they're brother and sister, they're half brother and sister, right? So, well, what that really means is David's oldest son, Amnon, he really falls in lust with her, is what it is. And we're told that Amnon became so obsessed with his sister Tamar that he made himself ill. He was so consumed with his thoughts for her and his wanting her that he literally made himself feel ill. And so he had a friend, an advisor, who is his cousin. It's David, King David's brother, one of his brothers, his son. So they're first cousins, and they're friends, and they're hanging out. And he tells his cousin about it, and so he and his cousin hatch a plan. Actually, it was his cousin's plan. He says, I know how you can get her to come to your house. He says, you just tell David, your dad, that you're sick and you're not feeling well, and ask him to send Tamar to come and help take care of you. So before I continue, I just want to say, be careful who you seek advice from, right? Even if that advice is what you want to hear, it doesn't necessarily mean it's good advice. This was terrible advice. Number one, he was advising Amnon to lie to his dad, but more importantly, his dad was the king, right? And so he's conspiring to lie to the king and for what he's about to do with his sister, unfortunately. So Amnon, he does that. He calls his dad and says, oh, I'm so sick. Boy, I'm not feeling well. And so David comes to him because, of course, he's the heir to the throne. And David comes and checks on him. He says, oh, I'm not feeling good. Would you send my sister Tamar to come? Maybe she could make a meal for me. Maybe she could take care of me. So David does. He says, hey, Tamar, go and help your brother David take care of him. Not David, Amnon. Now, there was no reason for her to do that. There were none. They had different households, and so she wasn't even living in his household. And they had servants to make meals and to take care of, right? There was really no reason for David to send his sister, his daughter Tamar there. When she gets there, Amnon sends everybody out of the house, and then he confesses to her, I'm not really sick. I would like to be with you. And she says, oh no, my brother, this thing should not be done in Israel. We're brother and sister. This is not right. Well, Amnon is stronger than her, and he overpowers her. And then, And we think back of the words of Jesus' brother James. Each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed. Then after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And I just want to say, when you find yourself being tempted by something, not just something of the physical nature, when you find yourself being tempted, remove that temptation from you right away. Change your thoughts. Think about something else. You have the ability to do that. Don't dwell on it. Don't be like Amnon, who just kept thinking and thinking about it until he made himself practically sick. And if you can't remove this temptation from you, you remove yourself from the temptation. The Apostle Paul tells us to flee sexual immorality. So maybe there's sometimes you might actually have to run away. Do whatever you have to do. But remove yourself from temptation. Because James tells us that when sin is full grown, it gives birth to death. And while James, of course, is talking about a spiritual death inside us, Amnon experiences a literal death because of his sin. We're about to see that. But after Amnon was with her, we're told that then he hated her with an intense hatred. In fact, we're told he hated her more than he had loved her. And Amnon said to her, get up and get out. And you can go and you can read the rest of the story there. But the whole reason I'm even bringing this up is that this is the allure of sin. It's shiny. It makes us feel like, wow, this is something I really want. I can't live without this, especially forbidden fruit, right? That seems like, oh, that's going to taste the best. But then once we have it, it's like, wow, that wasn't as great as I thought it was going to be. That wasn't everything I had hoped. I find this often with me with chocolate cake and chocolate cookies and stuff like that. I like chocolate, and I see this dessert, and I think, oh, this is going to be amazing. I don't need this. It's not good for my blood sugar. Well, okay, I'm just going to have it. And then I do, and it's like, wasn't that great, right? Right? You guys have experienced that in other areas. Maybe not chocolate. Maybe that wasn't a good example. But for me, that's what it is. Well, Absalom, so her brother, by the same mom then, he takes Tamar into his house, and he says, oh, don't worry about it. Isn't he your brother? Don't worry about this thing. Just be quiet about it now. And tells her just not to worry about it, and takes her into his house and cares for her. And so there's more to that story. You can go and read it yourself. But we're told when King David heard all of this, he was furious. And David did nothing. He was furious and he did nothing. And so let's think about that for a minute. Amnon's an adult. He's no longer living at home. He's got his own household. So parents, right, when your kids have grown up and they're out of the house, you can't really tell them what to do. You can be mad at their poor choices, but you don't really have a lot of control over them, except this is a different circumstance because David is the king of Israel, right? This isn't just a common family and this happened within their family. David is the king. Now, if anybody else had done that to the king's daughter, he'd be put to death. But Amnon is his heir. He's his oldest son. So what David could have done, what would have been the right thing to do, was to make Amnon marry her. That would have been the right thing to do. But he didn't. He didn't do it. He did nothing. And perhaps he thought to himself, well, how can I point a finger and blame Amnon when I myself gave into my own desires? And I did a little worse than that. I had a woman's husband killed so that I could have her. You know, the older I get, the more self-aware I am, the more forgiving I am of other people for their shortcomings. The more I see my own failings and my own shortcomings, the more forgiving I am of others. And maybe David has gotten to that point in his life. We don't know. Parents, I have another question for you. What's the worst thing your kids ever did to each other when they were fighting? Right? Our kids, they fight, they get back and forth. What's the worst thing one of your sons or daughters did to their brother or sister when they were fighting? Or let me ask you this. What's the worst thing you ever did to a brother or sister to get back at them when you were mad at them? You don't have to say it out loud. Just think about it, right? 2 years go by. 2 years go by. Absalom, he never says a word to Amnon, neither good nor bad. He just ignores him, stays away from him, doesn't say anything to him. Nothing has happened. And we're told that Absalom, it's sheep shearing time and all the sheep are getting sheared. And so, do you remember when David and his men were wandering and they were by Nabal's place and they were sheep shearing time? They had the big party and they make the big dinner and the banquets, and David went to him and said, hey, how about giving us a little, right? Same kind of thing. Absalom's sheep are being sheared. He's going to have a party and a big festival to celebrate this. And so he goes to David, his father, and he says, hey, we're going to have this little party. Would you come? Please come. And David says, oh, you know what, if it would be too much for you if I came, because I've got me, I've got all my men, my soldiers, the bodyguard, it'd be too much. And so Absalom says, well, okay, all right, well, how about, would you mind if I did it with my brothers and sisters? We'll just have the rest of the family come without me. And David says, okay, sure, that's fine. And Absalom says, well, and Amnon too. Make sure Amnon comes. And David, we don't know what he was thinking. He's like, well, why Amnon? Why should Amnon come? And Absalom says, well, I just want all my brothers to be there. This is one big happy family. So David tells Amnon, go to your brother's party, go celebrate with them. Once again, we see David's kids manipulating him, lying to him, so that they can achieve their sinful purposes. Absalom tells his men, we're going to have this party when my brothers and sisters are here, when we start drinking. At a certain point in the evening, when I give the signal, I want you to kill Amnon. And so they do. The brothers, sisters comes, they have a party, they're feasting. All of a sudden, Absalom gives the signal, and Absalom's men come, and they stab and kill Amnon. And all the other brothers and sisters flee. You can go and read, there's more to the story than that. But I just want to say this, that bitterness and anger left unresolved in us becomes poisonous to us. Poisonous to us and to those around us. And Absalom, he nurtured his anger and pain in silence instead of seeking justice for Tamar. And his bitterness eventually turned to murder. He could have went to David and said, hey, look, Absalom did this. You know what Amnon did this. You know what the right thing is. Make them get married. There's no record of that. Instead, he silently brooded and let this bitterness fester. And when we don't deal with bitterness or anger in our own lives, it festers. And most of the time, sometimes, right, they say time heals all wounds. Sometimes over time we just kind of let it go. But a lot of times we hang on to that for years. And it festers. And sometimes it can lead us to make destructive choices. So, confession, offering forgiveness when it's not deserved, even getting counseling, those things can prevent long-term spiritual decay for us. If you're harboring bitterness or anger in your heart today against someone, I encourage you to turn it over to God. Pray about it. Ask God to help you let it go. There's a story. Do you guys know who Corrie ten Boom is? Her family, Corrie ten Boom was put in a concentration camp. And years later, when she got out, she was traveling around and speaking and telling her story. And one of the men that was a guard at the concentration camp that she was in came up to her afterwards. And he said, I was a guard at the camp. Would you forgive me? And some of you know this story. And she said that all this mix of emotions came up inside her. And she just said, God, I can't forgive. Help me forgive. And she felt her hand lift and her arm and her hand reach out towards this man and took his hand and said, I forgive you. She couldn't do it on her own. She needed God's help. We need God's help to forgive. When we hold on to stuff, it just hurts us. It festers inside us. Sometimes praying isn't enough. Sometimes we need to go and talk to someone about it. Maybe you need to talk to a friend. Maybe you need to talk to your pastor. Maybe you need to go see a counselor and get some therapy or some counseling. Whatever it takes, I encourage you to let that stuff go. Don't allow that weight to hold you down anymore. Set yourself free. Well, both Amnon and Absalom, they lied to their father. They manipulated him so they could carry out their sinful intentions. Now, Absalom flees. He knows that David's not going to let this pass. Rape in the family is one thing, but killing the heir of the throne, that's something else. So Absalom, he flees and he goes to his grandfather, who's the king of Geshur. And Absalom hides out there with him, and he stays there for 3 years. Well, David, we're told, is furious that Absalom killed Amnon. And so David did nothing. He did nothing other than just sit and fume and be furious at him. 3 years go by, and Joab, who's David's commander of his army, he can see that this is eating David up, that David really wants Absalom to come home. David has forgiven him. He's been consoled about the death of Amnon, and now he wants Absalom to come home. So on his own, Joab goes, and he goes to Absalom and goes up to Geshur, and he gets Absalom, and brings him back home. But David won't see him. He won't allow him to come into his presence. And so even though he misses him, he's still mad at him, and he won't let him come. And Absalom, over the course of several years, requests again and again of his dad, hey, let me come before you. Hey, can I come and talk to you? At least let's have a conversation. And David won't see him. So Absalom starts to ask Joab, hey, will you go and talk to David for me? Will you go talk to the king and see if he'll come see me? And pretty soon, Joab gets tired of Absalom's request, and so he just starts to ignore him too. And Absalom gets so desperate for his father's attention, and he wants to come and talk to him and have that relationship restored. He finally goes to Joab's. Joab has a field that is next to one of his, and he has his servants burn the field and burn all the grain in the field. Well, that gets Joab's attention. So then Joab comes to him and he says, what do you want? What is it that you want, you spoiled little brat? He didn't say that, but I'm sure he was thinking that. And Absalom says, just ask my dad to talk to me. Just tell him, I just want to see him. So Joab, so remember how Nathan comes to David and he tells this story. Oh, there was this rich man with lots of sheep, and this poor man, he only had one little lamb. And it was his children nurtured it. It was like a child, right? Nathan tells this whole story to get David all, right? And then he says, you are that man. Well, Joab has a woman go and talk to David and spins this whole story about how she had 2 sons, and one of them killed the other out of anger, and now everyone's after the young son, and she'll have no sons then, and how could David help her? And you can go and you can read the story. Well, once again, David gets hooked in, and then at the very end, she tells him, hey, well, your own son, you haven't forgiven him. And anyways, you can go and you can read the story. So I know David's like a sucker for these stories. Absalom was desperate for his father's attention. And my question for you, dads, what do your kids have to do to get your attention sometime? Even when they're adults and they're not living in your house anymore. Right? We're busy. A lot of us are working. We're working on our house. We got our social things going on. We're busy. Life is busy. Don't make your kids desperate for you. Even your adult kids. Be available to them. Right? Know their needs. Be available to them. Because what happens is eventually Absalom sours against his dad. Eventually, his dad just won't see him, won't take the time for him, and that desperation to have that connection and restored relation turns into sour. And then Absalom starts to work against his father. And we read the scripture just a few minutes ago. He goes out, and this is a plot. Absalom, he's very patient, right? He waited 2 years to take his revenge on Amnon. Absalom now hatches a plot. And for 4 years he goes out and he starts to win over the hearts of the people. Oh, if I was king, you'd have justice. Oh, boy, you really got a case there. Too bad there's no one in David's court to help you. Boy, if I was a judge, I'd be helping you out because oh, yeah. He starts to win over the favor of the people. Now, parents, one more question. What's the worst thing your kids ever did to you? Your kids ever get mad at you and do something to you? You ever punish your kids and have them do something to try to get back at you? One time we were having a conversation with our daughters just a few years ago, and we were talking about some events that had happened. My daughter said, "Oh yeah, I was so mad at you, I went and spit on your pillow so that night when you went to bed, you'd be laying in my spit." It's funny, we laugh about it now. Absalom goes and he seeks out his dad and he says, "Hey, I made this promise that if I ever was allowed to return home from Geshan, that I would go back there and offer sacrifice and worship the Lord. So would you allow me to fulfill the vow I made to the Lord?" And so David says, "Oh yeah, absolutely, go and fulfill the vow you made." Now, here's Absalom lying to his dad again, and now he's bringing God into it. If this isn't an example of taking the Lord's name in vain, I don't know what is. Well, David gives us permission, and Absalom left, and then came back shortly later with an army. See, Absalom went out, and all these people he'd been winning their hearts over, he went and he gathered them all together. And he comes back and he starts marching towards Jerusalem. And David hears about it. David hears that Absalom is on his way to take the city and to take him. And David once again is on the run. David flees. And this time he's not in his 20s. This time he's in his 60s. And David, we're told, he gets his men and all the at least his army, the people that were there with him, his bodyguard, and the people that were there around Jerusalem. And David says, "Okay, I could hold up here. We could try to hold them off for as long as we could. But eventually, Absalom is going to take the city." He's got a pretty big army coming towards him. At least that's what the report said. And so David says, if I do that, Absalom's going to put this city to death. He's going to destroy the city and kill everybody here because they supported me. So he said, the best thing I can do for my people as their king is to leave. So he does. Gets his army together, gets his family, his faithful followers, and they start to leave Jerusalem. And he takes the ark of the Lord with them. And as David gets outside the city, he has a change of heart. And he says, "No, take the ark of the Lord back into Jerusalem. Take it back into the city." And all of his men became disheartened. See, this is a big deal, right? The ark of the Lord, when you have the ark of the covenant or the ark of the Lord with you, that signifies God's presence. And so when you have the ark, all the soldiers are like, "Hey, God is with us. God's presence is with us. God's on our side." And when David sent the ark back into the city, his men were like, "Oh, David's sending the presence of the Lord away. God is no longer with us." And Absalom, he's going to be in Jerusalem. He's going to have God on his side. He's going to have God with them. And so they pleaded with David not to do that. And David said, "No." David said, this is what I love about David. You see his heart, right? Even in his sin, even though he's suffering consequences later, he recognizes that and he says, "No, I'm going to put myself in the Lord's hands. If it's God's will that Absalom come and kill me and take over, and if it's God's will and God's timing for Absalom, then so be it. That's God's will. But if it's the Lord's will that I return and be in the Lord's presence again, then so be it. That's God's will. But I'm going to leave that up to God. I'm not going to try to take that into my own hands." And what we see here, this is something that should be, I hope, so true for us as well. David models this. It's great. He says that even when it seems like God has left me, even when it seems like the circumstances around me are going really bad, and where's God? Where's all of a sudden God's blessings that I used to have? He doesn't, even though he thinks maybe God left him, he doesn't leave God. He says, I'm going to put myself in God's hands. And if that means it's punishment, it's punishment. If that means my time as king is over, my time is over. But I'm going to trust in the Lord. And I want to encourage you guys, we all go through difficult circumstances in life. Hopefully our children aren't chasing us down to try to kill us, right? Hopefully not that bad. But when you're in a difficult circumstance, I just want to encourage you, put your life in God's hands. Pray about it, turn it over, let God work in your life. Let God work in the lives of others. Keep your trust in him. Well, Absalom, he and his army come, and they're shortly behind David. I mean, David pretty much just gets out in time. Absalom and the army come, they come into Jerusalem, they take it over. And Absalom goes to his same cousin who gave him such great advice a couple years before. He says, what do you think I should do? We're here now. I got to establish that I'm king now and not David. What should I do? And his cousin with the great advice says, well, I'll tell you what. Why don't you take David's concubines? He had left 10 behind. And why don't you go up on the roof of the house where everybody can see you, and why don't you sleep with them? And that way everybody will see, here you are, sleeping with your father's concubines. And one, that'll make you even more onerous to your dad. He'll be so mad at you, everybody will know this is coming to a head. There's no coming back from this. And two, those that are around you, they'll be even more resolved to serve you and fight against David. So that's what Absalom does. And Absalom fulfills Nathan's prophecy. Nathan had said, this is what the Lord says, out of your own house, I'm going to bring calamity on you. Before your very eyes, I will take your wives and give them to one who is close to you, and he will sleep with your wives in broad daylight. David, you did your sin in secret with Bathsheba, but I will do this thing in broad daylight before all Israel. And that's what happens. Well, David starts to flee. There's more to the story. It's an exciting story, you guys. I encourage you to go and read it. We're in 2 Samuel. Go and read it. But David and his army, they're fleeing. And Absalom and his army comes out to try to chase them down. And Absalom has a huge army. And David, he's got an army, but it's a smaller force. And so as David realizes, okay, conflict is unavoidable, here we go, this is going to happen, he says to Joab and the other two generals that he had, commanders of his army, he says, listen, when this is over, if possible, go gentle on the young Absalom. Spare him for my sake. Please spare him. Because David knows that even though Absalom has a superior force, what's about to happen. See, most of the time, at that time, for battles and for thousands of years, the two armies would get out in a field and they would face each other and they would face off and the armies would come and clash. And oftentimes, usually, that superior force would win. Well, they don't do that. David and his men go into the forest. And Absalom's army pursues them. And the fight takes place in the forest. And in the forest and in the jungles, superior numbers don't always mean that you're going to win. David has men who are battle-hardened. They have a lifetime of fighting. And they are experienced fighters. And Absalom armies comes into the forest and they have their fight. And Joab, David's army under Joab and his generals, they make short work of it. And we're told, and I think it's hyperbole, but we're told that even the forest ate up more of Absalom's soldiers than died in battle. So I think that's hyperbole, but the point is that all of a sudden, Absalom and his men start to flee. And a couple of Joab's high men are chasing, they see Absalom, they start chasing him. And Absalom is on a horse, and he's on the horse and he's galloping. Now, something that I skipped earlier in the story, a couple chapters before, when they start talking about Absalom and how he's gaining the favor of people and he's going out at the city gate, they start talking about how handsome he is and how perfect of a specimen there was. There wasn't a blemish from his head to his toe. He was just perfect, and he had this long, flowing, golden blonde mane of hair. And his hair was so long, and he would only cut it once a year. And when he would cut it, because it was too heavy for him, and they would cut it, and here's how much his hair weighed. They make a big deal. This is several chapters earlier, years earlier in the life, but for us reading it, it's right there in the story. Here's Absalom, long flowing hair. He's riding on the horse, right? And he's riding fast as he can to try to get away. His hair's flowing in the breeze, and he ducks under this tree branch, and his hair gets wrapped around this tree branch. And the horse goes out from under him. He gets yanked off, and he's literally hanging in the air by his hair. So here he is, hanging there. Joab's men that were pursuing him, they come upon him, and they send word to Joab, who's not far away, hey, we got Absalom. We got him. He's hanging by his hair from a tree. You can't even make that up, right? And so Joab says, well, did you kill him? And they said, oh, no. And Joab said, yeah, but I promised this great reward. You'd be a rich man right now if you had killed him. And the reply is great. They said, your money would be nothing compared to what would happen to us when the king found out we killed his son. And so Joab, he's a little different. He goes and he finds Absalom and he kills him himself. And then they bring him down, and we're told that they go and they bury him in a pit and cover it with rocks instead of bringing his body back to David. Now, I don't know, there's probably more involved there, and you can go and read that. It's an interesting story. But word gets back to David that Absalom is dead. And his men, they're all celebrating their victory, right? Hey, we just won this mighty battle. And David starts mourning. And as they get back to the city where David was hiding, they see David in mourning. And all of a sudden, all his men are like, oh, he's mourning his dead son. So now, you can't be, hey, king, yeah, we killed your son. Oh, we're so glad. You can't do that in front of the king. So now we're told all of his men, they go into mourning as well. And Joab, he's mad. He has had it. He's had it with David. He's had it with his bratty kids. And so he goes and finds David and sets him straight. He says, listen, all these men, they put their life at risk for you. They went out to war for you. They could have died. And here you're mourning over the death of your son who was trying to kill you and kill them. He said, if you don't come out and celebrate with your men and stop mourning, by morning time, they will have all deserted you. And you will be in a worse spot as if Absalom had caught you. So David comes to his senses. He stops mourning, and he goes out and celebrates with this man. Now, next week will be our last week. We're going to study next week about one more of David's sons tries to abdicate the throne, tries to take the throne from him. So we're going to read about that next week. And of course, as you know, instead David appoints Solomon as king. So we're going to talk about that next week. But I just want to leave you with this. Every decision we make, every action we do has a consequence. Sometimes the consequence is good, right? If you eat healthy and you exercise, the consequences of those actions are positive. You're going to feel better. You're going to feel good. You're going to be in good shape. If you eat poorly, if you never exercise, if you engage in bad, poor health habits, the consequences are probably going to lead to poor health, right? Health is only one. Think about every area of your life. Everything you do, every action has a reaction of some kind. So, here's my encouragement to you this morning. Regardless of your past, regardless of decisions you've made in your past, even if right now you're living among the consequences of some poor decisions you made in the past, it's never too late to start making good decisions. It's never too late to submit your will to God. It's never too late. The Apostle Paul says, forget what lies behind, press on towards what lies ahead. And that's what I encourage you to do this morning. Please pray with me. Father, regardless of our past, regardless of the great decisions we've made or the poor decisions we've made. Would you help us today and every day going forward to submit our hearts to you, to submit our plans and our wills to you? Would you help us to make wise choices so that we could live with fewer regrets? We ask this, Father, through the power of your Holy Spirit. In Jesus' name, amen. David received